Hi, everyone, and welcome to Snowflake Office Hours. My name's Zoe Beath, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Snowflake customer PowerChord. PowerChord is a local lead generation and engagement SaaS platform for manufacturers operating in over 30 countries. Today's Office Hours speaker is John Adams, CTO of PowerChord and longtime Snowflake advocate. John Adams will be speaking today about his experience using Snowflake, and then he'll be able to answer any questions you have about his experiences at the end of the webinar. So throughout the presentation, please type any questions you have into your On24 panel, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of the session. So without further ado, over to you, John.
Thanks. Hi. As mentioned, I'm John Adams. I'm the CTO at PowerChord, and I just want to kind of take you guys through a journey of how we got to using Snowflake and some of the trials and tribulations we had getting there. Big thing with me, I'm into affordable insights, so hopefully you guys enjoy this. So who and what? I'm, like I said, John Adams, CTO at PowerChord. This is my third time using Snowflake. I'm a huge lover of Golang and data. I hate sampled data. PowerChord is a local lead gen platform. We're active in over 30 countries, and we definitely have some data needs, and they need to be affordable. So, what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about our needs, our attempts at solving those needs, and finally our solution, which is Snowflake, which we love here. And so one of the things with PowerChord, we needed to be able to look at generating, insights that were granular enough and important enough that we could show it to dealers. We have ranges probably around 15 to 20,000 dealers in our system across the world. They need to be able to see data that's relevant to them, and we need to be able to roll that data up and aggregate it, to different levels, and make sure that all these consumers can see this. And we also don't really want to scale to have a big data management or like DBA team. So that's kind of some of our needs. So our first attempt back in 2012, we decided we were a .NET shop. We were a SQL like Microsoft shop. And we were like, yeah, we can use SSAS. We can build all the things. We were leveraging technology that we were already used to and already licensed. Some of the negatives there were it required a lot of engineering. It required us to have a DBA to manage creation of indices and go ahead and make sure our data shaped right. A lot of build out like fact dimension stuff, and the storage was pretty expensive. But probably the biggest problem we had was the rigid implementation. It required engineers to go ahead and extend the reporting. It required engineers to go and build different visualizations or extend the data model. It was just kind of painful. So we just decided to go ahead and start using off-the-shelf solutions. We decided, Google Analytics. We were a pretty small agency at the time. It was great. It was cheap. It was sampled, but it was cheap. We could allow and empower like our digital marketing teams and our product teams to go ahead and create reports for our users. We could share those reports pretty easily. Some of the pain points that we encountered, as I'm sure quite a few folks have, it gets expensive if you actually want access to your data. It's sampled, once again, boo. Segregating clients meant segregating accounts, which was not exactly the most optimum way of managing. And then, the folks that wanted to access were limited to people with GA access. This kind of created a problem for us when we were looking at overarching or, creating global views of our platform. So, a few years later, third-ish attempt, we decided to go with some other cloud data warehouses, which probably not going to say the name, a bunch of different ETL tools. We were all excited. We felt like grown-ups. Felt that we had, better tooling. We were able to segment our data by client. We were able to report on overall systems globally. We were able to capture a lot. biggest issues though we ran into was really cost and performance of access. We noticed the more data we were getting in, the more our actual viewers were impacted. It became a lot more expensive for us to get data into the system. It was flexible, but it just had some performance problems. And so, going forward, surprise, we decided to go with Snowflake. Good things about that, there was no DBA. It truly was laissez-faire database management. We're able to shove all of our data into the system. I like to joke around using Snowflake as our data lake. Sure, it doesn't exactly support unstructured data, but using external tables and things, we can accomplish some of that. We're able to have concurrency. That's probably the biggest one. Being able to insert data into the system, being able to ingest it from, various ETL tools or just directly through like event stream processing. We're able to shove data into Snowflake and never impact our consumers of that data. The data is just beautifully segmented, especially when leveraging like secured views. We can sit here and share direct access to our warehouse with larger clients, which they find to be actually kind of nice and make us approachable. The data we are able to share with them is secured at the column row level down to their data, and we really don't have to worry about too much. We're able to mix structured and semi-structured. There's no sampling. I can't harp on this probably enough. It was one of those things, looking at data in some of these analytics solutions, there was no real, you couldn't tell if you were actually looking at something accurate, especially when trying to drill down into granular levels. And it became easy to integrate, being built off of, allowing you to write, a superset of ANSI SQL 2003. Everybody in the company seems to know how to write SQL. The tools are there, whether it's Power BI or Looker, and predominantly I use Looker, but the tools support Snowflake. And probably the biggest pain point I have is it really did take too long to get here. I disappeared from PowerChord a couple years ago, and I came back, and luckily I had a great experience with Snowflake and was able to get that rolling. I think one of the best things, though, is, we launched a product earlier this year that was 2 years in the making. It had been attempted to be built with, other cloud data warehouse solutions. And this is one of the customer testimonials we had from it, from like one of the regional marketing managers. And realistically, the Insights portal, the product that we launched, we built in about 3 months, leveraging Looker and Snowflake and Golang, because Golang's awesome. What's kind of funny was, had we not chosen to build it on Looker and Snowflake, we probably still wouldn't have launched it. Our clients would not have been happy. And the fact is that it's become successful across our entire client base. I know everyone loves numbers, so what's kind of funny is compared to our previous data warehouse or cloud data warehouse, we're spending about 50% of what we were spending then, yet we're gaining exponentially better performance capabilities. We don't have concurrency issues. We don't have issues with, trying to get semi-structured data in and out, and we don't have sampling issues. So kind of final point, I trust Snowflake enough to recommend it to pretty much anybody I talk to. There's a joke that it takes me about 3 minutes to plug Snowflake in any conversation. This is my third time using it. As I mentioned, it won't be my last. And, I wanted to end this kind of on another quote. Local CTO here in St. Pete, made this comment to me the other day, and it really just, it kind of resonates. Snowflake solves a lot of problems for a lot of people, and, I'm super happy to plug it because I've had nothing but great experiences with it my last 3 times using it. So now we'll get to the fun questions.
Great. Thank you so much, John, for that fantastic presentation. I certainly enjoyed it. Yeah, so let's start the Q&A portion of today's presentation. feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to get to them. So let's start off with this question. So what was the biggest challenge you faced implementing Snowflake?
I guess it was kind of around figuring out what we wanted to get into there. Some of the biggest challenges were more the company challenges of we had a lot of historic data in places that weren't necessarily easy to get data out of. That's been probably the biggest challenge. From an actual implementation standpoint, there hasn't been a lot of headaches. Like I said, I've used Snowflake a few times now. It is pretty easy to get data in. Snowpipe is a fantastic way of getting data in, as well as other ETL, like third-party ETL tools. But I guess the biggest challenge, like I said, is just getting data out of some of the legacy systems.
Right, that definitely makes sense, and it's great that you've used Snowflake so many times. So following up on that point, in terms of the ETL tools that you're using, can you elaborate on what you're using with Snowflake?
Yeah, so we use Illuma. Illuma is pretty much managed Kafka with a little Python code engine in there. Works pretty well. We also have used Stitch data. We've used Funnel.io to S3. We dabbled with Matillion. It seems like most tools just now support Snowflake, or at least support dropping an S3 file, and Snowflake can ingest that pretty easily with Snowpipe. But it really... For stream data, we use Illuma. For moving things out of OLTP databases and whatnot, we tend to use Stitch data.
Right, and so we have a question here. How much time did it take to implement Snowflake start to end, and how many terabytes of data did you have?
Terabytes now, not exactly positive. We probably have a couple hundred. A lot of clickstream data, a lot of supporting. Tables, but they're mainly lookup tables, relatively static. But the predominant use of us, for right now, is impressions and page views and interactions with our lead capture forms and stuff. There was another part to that question.
So how much data did you have? So how long did it take from start to finish to implement Snowflake, and how much data did you have?
So it was starting off, it was just a bunch of historic Google Analytics 360 data to ingest. Like I said, it's probably, couple hundred, maybe 100 terabytes at that point. It was pretty easy to onboard. We didn't really have a problem with ingestion. What we were able to do is spin up a larger data warehouse to ingest a larger amount of data. So instead of worrying about trying to get a smaller compute cycle running for a long time, we spin up a 2XL cluster and just ran that. Ingestion times are relatively real time for us. So I mean, it's getting up to speed's pretty straightforward. The documentation around dumping to S3 and sucking in blobs of data it's pretty easy. It's just using staging of S3 buckets.
Right. So we have a question here that's alluding to sampling. You've talked a lot about how you dislike sampling. Could you please elaborate on that?
Yeah, so a lot of the data, or a lot of the analytics services you come across, they seem real snappy and responsive. And you'll notice that as you look at trying to dig down into, drill down into details, that they're using sampled data sets. I think Google, a table that has, I'm probably wrong, but it's 50,000, 500,000 records in it, will automatically be sampled in the reporting. So if you're sitting here and generating reports off of this data, you tend to start seeing your sessions don't necessarily reflect truly where they came from. We started noticing issues without dealing with the raw data that this is a kind of the approach that folks take in order to make the solutions a little more scalable. They were providing good insights from a macro level, but drilling in starts getting the data is obviously summarized and sampled and not exactly accurate down to the event level. So with Snowflake, we do all of our reporting directly off of the raw data. So we're able to aggregate up, drill down, and the performance, from a reporting standpoint, we actually use a medium instance. So there's plenty of headroom, a single node cluster. We actually haven't had to scale up much, and that's supporting, like I said, about 15,000 users at any given time.
That's interesting insights. So we have a question here. What makes Golang so compatible to Snowflake?
One of the great things is Snowflake. So my last company was also a Go company. Go's awesome. Everyone should write it. But Snowflake was I was surprised when I came across it because there was a native driver for the Golang SQL implementation. There was a native Snowflake driver for it available, back in, I think it was 2017, 2015, maybe. It was certainly available as soon as I started using it. What I love with Snowflake is it really supports a lot of concurrent access, and with Golang's Golang is all about concurrency and kind of cloud scale development. Became very easy to be able to make sure that we can throw as many requests as we want at Snowflake and not really have a problem with scalability or concurrency.
That's great. So we have a few questions here around cost. So what was the largest cost consideration with the Snowflake implementation?
So with Snowflake, Snowflake actually is probably one of the cheaper aspects. I want to say the advertised price is something like $43 a terabyte per month. Am I right, Zoe? Right?
Yes.
Okay, so it's something like that, but it just became, it ended up being a lot cheaper since we're only paying for, capacity, actual consumption. It's and everything kind of goes down to by the minute pricing. We're able to auto suspend our warehouses. So our query warehouse I mentioned is a medium warehouse. We're able to suspend it after 5 minutes, I believe, of non-use. So traditionally during downtimes throughout the day, our warehouse will shut down. It takes, a second or so to spin back up the next time someone wants to query it or pretty much just query it because our warehouse is read-only. And that's kind of it. It's the cost-wise, most of the cost we found was actually eaten up in other ETL tools.
Great. So let's shift gears here a little bit. Do you use SQL Server to connect Snowflake?
We do ship data out of SQL Server over into Snowflake. We're actually using Illuma to do that replication. We could use, I believe, Stitch data for that as well, but our legacy product that is on SQL Server, we do have that shipping, we do have that ETL'd over.
Great. So what was your use case of the semi-structured variant data?
So we definitely abuse it. It's one of those, all of our clickstream data pretty much gets into, it goes through a little bit of a sanitation process in Illuma and in API Gateway. But the finalized data is shoved into a table that has a handful of metadata columns and then a handful, 5 different pretty big variant data columns. One of the neat things is, we leverage, like I said, Looker and secured views and whatnot. So we're able to shape that data at query time with very little to no impact on performance. And so what we found is, by storing things like storing, JSON, clickstream data in its data format, we're able to extend that model pretty easily. We're able to, reimagine, we reimagine the data we're storing in the raw form. we're also able to, like, one of the cool things we did was we found out, oh, God, we would like to expand on some data that we previously hadn't really, pre-processed through Illuma. So what we ended up doing was, versioning our variant docs, and then running a batch job pretty much to go and update all the data in place. Big batch update for anything that didn't have the columns that we wanted to enhance the data or enrich the data with. We were able to do that directly in the variant columns, and it took minutes to do, not hours or days, just by spinning up a large warehouse to, iterate through that.
Perfect. So we have a couple of questions here about security. So firstly, how was access control implemented? And secondly, how is column and row level security implemented?
So you have a couple of things, like you can spin up. Most of our access control is through our dashboard provider, like Looker. We have application control where we restrict users based off of JWT tokens to certain subsets of data. Now, if we grant somebody direct access to our data, we do that using having them either use their own warehouse. So Snowflake allows a zero copy sharing of data. So we can sit here and we can allow a client, if they're already on Snowflake, to connect to our warehouse and gain access to that data. And what we do is we create a secured view, which has certain requirements. You're actually limiting the data they have access to. That's really how we tackle both cases. If we decide that a client wants to have access just maybe through directly through Power BI, we can spin up a warehouse on their behalf in our account and share the data that way. But once again, using secure views.
Great. So, how did you train, your users to use Snowflake? Was there any particular?
So most of them we didn't have to. So the folks that have access, currently to Power BI and are using those types of tools, they connect directly to Snowflake just like they would any other data source supported by it. So it's pretty straightforward for the internal customer or internal users that we have. That most of them are accessing it directly through like Looker, some intermediary. But we do have our customer success folk, some of our product folk that just run SQL queries against Snowflake. It's pretty easy because it's ANSI SQL. The only thing that gets a little kind of wonky is the SnowQL additions, like the variant column. So we'll either just point them to the documentation, or we'll go ahead and maybe create a little view for them to consume.
Great, and we're so glad it was so easy for you. So we have a question here about the app that you built on top of Snowflake. So at what point did you decide to build your new product on top of Snowflake, and really what was that aha moment for you?
To be completely transparent, the day I started, I found out there was this, this RFP type of deal kind of or an SOW hanging around that had been about stale for about 12 months, where people had gone back and forth on different ways of building some giant convoluted reporting mechanism. I was lucky enough to have had my predecessor at PowerChord come to one of my Snowflake presentations when I was at Bring Hub. And they'd already gone ahead and procured Snowflake. So I didn't actually have to sell anything. That was probably my aha moment. Was I knew the tool. I knew it was capable, like what it was capable of. I knew I was familiar with the data sets that PowerChord was working with. And there was already some legwork kind of done to get some subsets of that data over into Snowflake. So it was just kind of a no-brainer that we should build it on top of Snowflake and leverage, Looker just made it super convenient and speedy.
That's great. So how many data sources do you have, and how long did it take to implement them all?
That's a tough one. Since we kind of Quite a few. So, I mean, we have data even beyond data sources, let's just go into the different technologies. We have data in Spanner, we have data in Cloud SQL, we have data in SQL Server, we have data in Google Data Store. We have a lot of data just like sitting on S3. From external data sources, we have Google, Campaign Manager, all those. I mean, we have a proverbial crap ton of data sources out there. A lot of like client-specific ones. So I don't have an exact number, but too many probably. The time to get it on, each integration is pretty straightforward. Most ETL tools now are supporting Snowflake out of the box. So we found like our complexities of having, Illuma and Stitch data and Funnel.io, all that is mainly from our previous data warehouses. But what we found is getting the data into Snowflake's much quicker and pretty much zero effort.
That's great. So we have a question here. How did you implement having separate data hubs for staging and your actual data warehouse and data marts?
So we actually have the ability to create so we're able to create separate databases pretty easily. That's really how we've handled it. So we can segment all that data, pretty transparently. It's the different warehouses have access to different data sets or different databases. And so we're able just to utilize, basically the RBAC permissions on the warehouse to access certain data. So that's how we've segmented it, just traditional, create a database and a schema for what you want to store there.
Great. So we're nearly out of time, but let's just end on this final question. So if you had any 2 tips that you could share with new users, what would they be?
I would say it really, for the smaller, for larger folks, your data model should, you can probably do a one-to-one translation pretty easily. And I would probably try not to reshape your data too much. If you have some established data warehouse, the schema should transfer over pretty easily. For newer folks that are, maybe making that transition from using off-the-shelf components, get data in the raw. You can always rethink it. You can always reshape it. It's pretty easy. So I would just say maybe don't spend so much time. Don't spend so much time trying to reshape your data. Work with, throw in what you have.
That's great advice. Thank you so much, John. And thank you, everyone, for joining today's office hours, and especially you, John, for presenting. We'll have our next office hours session in 2 weeks' time, and we hope you can make it to that as well. So we'll be making the recording of this session available to everyone who joined tomorrow. So again, we hope you enjoyed this session, and have a good day. See you in the next office hours.
Thank you.